Just a little side remark that the textbook is structured, is laid out. The deep structure of the textbook is a calculus structure. It's also a structure according to the levels of absolute Christian Science and Christian Science, so that you have the calculus reflecting the calculus in 16 chapters, a 4x4 layout of 16 chapters, and then of course you have the glossary to the textbook, and you have fruitage, but not as the main body of the textual presentation of the science through the calculus. And in prayer it's very similar. Prayer is the word as the word, the same kind of a place value, and you are given all the constituents of the nature of God, and are shown that you have the same nature. You have the same constituency, and it's a quiet, holy, beautiful development through 7 tones, and actually a 7x7 array of the tones and subtones of that whole subject, bringing you finally to the standpoint of the Lord's Prayer at the close of that chapter. And but then she would show, Mrs. Eddy, but actually Being would show you that you can't stay there. That you can't stay hidden away in your closet. You know, in the 6th tone, it's all about the closet, how Jesus taught us how to pray. And she takes up how Jesus prayed, and that he said to enter into thy closet and to shut the door, and she takes that all up, beautiful sense of that being closed, being enclosed in that consciousness of truth. And then in the 7th tone, the result of that, the great opening up of consciousness to the sense of the universality of love. But Being says, you can't stay there. That will immediately come under the stress of circumstances. I'm sorry, but that's just the way it is. You can't have that as a theory. You can't just have that as a beautiful theory. It must be expressed in life. That's the Word as the Christ. So she shows that was Jesus' experience. And the 2nd chapter, of course, is Atonement and Eucharist, and you have the whole story of what Jesus' life was, what his experience was, and she speaks very much in the first part, especially. I think. I better not say. I'm not certain enough about it. But in the early part of the chapter, she talks about coming under the stress of circumstances, and would show that we are totally equipped through prayer to deal with every circumstance, whatever it is. So that's the same kind of relationship that you have between the days of creation and the commandments. Okay, that's all I wanted to say. I see I've opened a whole new can of worms. We could even continue the parallel, because when we come to the Beatitudes and see the result or the outcome as a blessed state being established in us, this is very much the tonality of the 3rd chapter in the textbook, the chapter on marriage, which is all to do with how we are changed, with the outcome of that working of the Christ on us in the Word as the Christ. That relationship between prayer and atonement and Eucharist we've talked about, and now we would see that in meeting, in the measure as we meet the demands of the Christ, that we are changed by that, we are changed by the Christ, and that there is an outcome then. So there is the process. It's so clear, isn't it? The input of prayer as the Word, where we are given everything that we need of the whole nature of God, and we are shown that that nature is not somewhere apart from us, but it's right within us, that we have all those qualities of the divine nature within us. So we are awakened and made conscious of that. And then the calculus says, but you can't stay there. You can't stay at the point of the Word as the Word, because the requirements of Word as Word have been met. And so the homeorrhea comes in now. The homeorrhea comes in and moves you on. You can't be static and stable and stay at Word as Word, but the homeorrhea comes in and moves you on to the Word as the Christ, and you are restabilized at the point of the Word as the Christ, or atonement and Eucharist, and you get all those demands of the Christ on you, and what does she say there? That man's ability to meet them is not from the human, not from the mortal, but from the divine. That you have the ability to meet every demand, just as Jesus did. And when we've fulfilled the requirements of the Word as the Christ, then that beautiful homeorrhea moves us on again, comes flowing right in from absolute Christian Science and destabilizes us, but in a beautiful, harmonious way, not a jolting way, but a beautifully balanced and regulated way, takes off the restraints of the homeostasis, and we're moved on to a new standpoint of the Word as Christianity, and the consciousness is restabilized again, and begins to look around and see what it is, what we are now that we've been changed. And that's a blessed state. And so with the third chapter, she gives that same tonality, the chapter marriage. She never says, well, now I'm going to tell you whether you should get married or not, and whether you should have children or not. And there's nowhere that she says get married or don't get married, have children or don't have children. It's something quite different, that she begins to show how we are taking on our true and complete manhood and womanhood under the impact of the Word as Word and Word as Christ. That we become complete, and what we do in relationship to others is governed by our consciousness of our completeness. So it's all about relationships and right relationships and the qualities that are expressed, and how those qualities grow and grow within us and lead us ever higher and higher. It's an ascending way. And she even says, well, if you're going to have progeny, you're going to have children, you know what will happen? They'll just become better and better progeny, higher and higher children. They won't. It's a gorgeous thing, because she even says, in a way, that the mortal can become better. It's the bettering, the improvement of the mortal out of itself. That the mortal is growing out of itself under the impact of the Christ, so that man becomes aware of his spiritual status. So then in comes the fourth chapter, that something within us wants to stay in the third chapter, because we love harmonious relationships. We love to see how the divine impacts the human, and that we have a humanity that has so much divinity in it, but it's still humanity. And so being says, this is still not high enough, and you must begin, a divine must, you do begin to ask higher and higher questions. What are those higher and higher questions? They're the ones that we find at the close of the 3rd chapter. All questions about, is man a creator or is God the only creator? Is matter real or is there really only one spirit? Is God spirit or not? And these are the higher questions that come from the progeny that have become higher and higher progeny. Huh? See? Can you hear it? Yeah. Each time there's a higher degree in the progeny and the bringing forth of a new generation, higher questions are asked. So then the child turns back and asks the parent all those right questions. But it's really the questions we ask ourselves as we evolve spiritward. And then those questions are answered in the 4th chapter, a chapter Christian Science versus Spiritualism, a chapter many Christian Scientists don't even want to read. They say, I'm not interested in spiritualism. Oh, I never touch the stuff. I'm not interested in that. I don't believe in spirits. I don't believe in spiritism, in the supernatural, in the paranormal, in all that stuff. And even though all that stuff is taken up by the 4th chapter, it's taken up within a greater context, a higher context of understanding or perceiving that actually spiritualism is a deeper issue. It's an issue of whether we have monism or dualism. Are we monistic or are we dualistic? So she would even show that if we believe in corporeal mortals, if we believe that each other is a corporeal mortal and that there are a lot of corporeal mortals running around, we believe in spiritualism. Mm-hmm. And we haven't seen yet the enormous point that the word as science makes, and that is that all is spirit. So that 4th chapter is a tremendous step, but that step can come in and comes in naturally with the close of the 3rd chapter as we, within our own consciousness, are led to ask higher and higher questions about what is real. Is creation material or is it spiritual? So, those are the word chapters. I didn't think I was going to go through the word chapters, but you'll hear that they are parallel in tone to what we take now as the Bible teachings. And if you want to know more about that, you need only to go to Max Kapler's volume on the structure of the Christian Science textbook. And there you have a very fundamental, basic, a clean, I want to say simple, but I don't mean simplistic. I mean simple in the best sense of leading you from chapter to chapter to chapter all the way through the 16 chapters of the textbook and the structure of it. Okay. So, and now we can look at our commandments and see that they are going to convey the word as the Christ. Those demands upon us to take the days of creation into our life experience. And that implies no longer to just think about these things, to think about being. Think about being. Have a kind of a separation there, as you thinking about something that's outside of you, and it's the job of the Christ, the office of the Christ, to bring into absolute coincidence now you with that which you're thinking about. Bring you into complete coincidence with that divine nature of the days of creation. So it's requiring of us a very active stand. It's an active demand on our character, on our makeup, on our attitude, on our feelings and thoughts and approach to whatever we are doing, to everything within our makeup. And this takes us out of an intellectual sense. The Christ saves us from a sense of it being merely intellectual, but we have seen. Now, the intellect is a positive thing. Intellect is a quality of mind, an aspect of mind. But to intellectualize something, or to keep it merely at the intellectual, where it is a theory that is inactive, a good theory, a wonderful theory, but not active within us, is handled by the Christ. The Christ will take care of that. So the Christ says, go to the 7 days whenever you have a problem, and to give to it the quality of the Christ, to claim it under the stress of circumstances, to base yourself on it, to trust in it, to rely on it. These are all the demands of the Christ, to submit yourself to it then. And we found our guiding principle, and now we must submit ourselves to it, and this is the Christ attitude. And so if we look at the first statement, that very first statement of the commandments, what do we see there? Let's read it together. And God spake all these things, all these words, saying, I am the Lord thy God. I am. What did we see the I am? In the days of creation. I am mind. I am spirit. I am soul, principle, life, truth, and love. So here it is the I am. God spake all these words, saying, I am the Lord thy God, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. As though to say to us, this doesn't sound like a command unless we put the right accentuation on it and give it the right interpretation. Remember, I am the Lord thy God. Remember, I am. Remember that I am, the I am that we've seen in the days of creation. This is the I am that has brought you out of Egypt. What is Egypt? Egypt is a symbol for any sense of darkness. You know that in the Bible, Egypt always symbolized a sense of going down into bondage, into darkness. It's the opposite of the light of mind. And here it's a statement, remember that I, and here it is specifically mind. We can take it in two ways. We can see the relationship between mind in the days of creation as the light of mind, and mind in the commandments, showing that that mind, that one mind that is ever shedding its light, throwing its light on everything, bringing the intelligent light and creativity to everything, that this is what saves from darkness. So remember that. Always remember that. Recall that to mind. Take that as your standpoint. Whenever you come into a condition of darkness that looks dark to you, which means you know what you have to act in order to bring a... Don't forget, I'm your mind. Huh? Don't forget. I not forget by always going back. Don't forget, start with mind, go through those days, recall that only saving power for you. Just a man to turn to mind. This system, that so-called ism, that ology, is not the Lord God. Am the Lord thy God. So make me principle that will bring the saving solution to the experience. Hear it? Yeah? Good. Not going to something else. Not going to anything. God, turn to mind. That's the first step. That this is the only power thing that can't save you. Submit yourself to the one mind. So we come to the second, that statement which is referred to, has always been referred to as the first commandment, and it is, thou shalt have no other gods before me. Spirit tone there, thou shalt have no other. No other. It's always there. Therefore you must not allow there to be any other, and you know how to accept that one God. This is spirit. Spirit is of being, the onlyness of the one mind, the onlyness of the principle now of those days of creation. So not this, I'll also carry along some other saving to save, and then if science doesn't work, I can fall back on out from the purity of spirit, and to allow that to continually lead the situation, to lead to the solution, to present spirit, to let the one mind which is spirit present them to you, of solving that darkness upon the face of the deep, to solve it by cover the whole thing. In case one doesn't work, the other one will. We have to start with a principle of the science of being. Then that can lead you in. Can you hear how different that is? That if I begin with a pure standpoint to anything that will help me. But this is the job of the Christ. Well, maybe so-and-so will help me. Well, maybe this system. Maybe the medical fact be the solution. Well, perhaps plain, a kind of helpmeet for you. But you don't know unless you must come out from the highest standpoint, the standpoint of Spirit. Keep it pure, and you deal with that situation. That's the onlyness. In the days of creation, we saw the onlyness of God, own Christ attitude. To keep that standpoint. Okay, we need to turn. In the first statement of the commandments, it was, I am the Lord thy God. But now the second statement says, and I am the only. I must be the only Lord thy God. See? It's not, I am the Lord thy God, and something else is the Lord thy God, and you can have 3 or 4 or 10 or 100 of these Lord thy gods. Spirit says, I'm the only thing, the only Lord thy God. And we come to the third commandment, third statement in the commandments. I'm going to read it to you first, and because it's hard for me to read it off of there, and then I'll put it up. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image, or any likeness of anything that is in the heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Sounds like some kind of levels or planes of the heaven above and the earth beneath, the waters under the earth. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them. Let's take it up to that point. No, I'll read the whole thing. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them. For I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation. What a cruel God. Right? A cruel God if we hear it if we interpret it with our moral sense. Visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me. This is the third statement of soul. Statement of soul. Why is this soul? Whenever you have graven images, you have idols, and you have a sense of false identity. A graven image is a false sense of identity, the counterfeit of soul, counterfeit of the third day of the identity of soul. So here the command is not to submit to that, not to take part in that, in idols, in false images of God. We say, oh, I never do that. But if we are not lined up with the days of creation, whatever is not lined up with the days of creation is a graven image, is a false identity. It's having a false identity, a false image. Something that isn't identical with God. And so it says, don't build up anything within you, within your mentality, within your consciousness, that isn't identical with God. It isn't of the same nature of those days of creation, of the whole identity of those days of creation. And you see that if we don't identify God spiritually as the seven, that we have a false identity. Now this is the idolatry within us. This is what the prophets had to deal with that. Oh, here we go again, the prophets, another enormous subject. But if you know that the prophets in the Bible, this is all the Christ era, and the prophets are rendered understandable through the Christ matrix, where we can see how the Christ works, how it deals with everything that is idolatrous within us, everything that isn't lined up with the Word is dealt with through the Christ. And in the actual surface text, in the surface experience there, you know that there was so much this claim of building up false and graven images and idols, and how they would build up the high places, and they would gather groups of trees and go up and worship there, and it's always talking about the high places, the high places. This was the counterfeit, really, of a true sense of identifying God and of worshiping that true sense of God within us. So the Christ has to deal with all of that within us, and does deal with it. And the third commandment, the third statement of the commandment, asks us not to have a false identity of God. It actually says, of anything that is in the heaven above, that's God, that's the divine, the absolute. Don't you try to identify what is divine. Don't you try to identify what is absolute. Let principle define itself to you. Define that which is divine. Define that which is absolute. And so don't have a mistaken identity, a mistaken sense of the identity of what mind is, of what spirit is, of what soul is. When we come together, when we come in and we come newly into this subject, we do have our own sense of what we think mind is, what we think spirit is. If you go into the Christian Science church and you ask a Christian Scientist, what is mind, or what is spirit, what is soul? It's been my experience in talking to various individuals that they don't really have that identity clear. They don't have first of all, a sense that there is an order in the synonymous terms. And they don't have a sense of what those synonymous terms are. The ideas are all mixed up. It has a lot of humanness in it, a lot of human identifying of what we think the identity of God is. This all has to be cleared up. And it's a Christ demand within us to keep that clear. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image or any likeness of anything that is in the heaven above. That's God. God is in the heaven above. And then that filters down to everything. Then that means that I also can't have any mistaken sense of the identity of the ideas of mind, the ideas of spirit, the ideas of soul, of what power means, of what intelligence means, of what cause means, of what origin means, of what the onlyness of spirit means, of what it means to be pure, of what the purity of spirit is. That every idea must be rightly identified. That's what you do with your Syllabus 1 work. You've been doing that with Syllabus 1, becoming so clear about those ideas, how they relate to each other. That's how you discover the depth, the infinite withinness of the meaning of the ideas. By relating them to each other, you see more and more and more about each individual idea. This is identifying properly. So thou shalt not make any graven image about those things which are in the heaven above. Then it says, or in the earth beneath. And that's in the relative. It's as though we are given 3 degrees here. The absolute sense, a relative sense. Don't try to identify anything in the relative on any other basis except the basis of your consciousness of the days of creation. Your understanding of the nature and identity of God. Your understanding of the nature and identity of God will identify to you everything, even in the relative. Nothing else can identify it properly to you. So when it says thou shalt not, it means the human sense within you. Don't do it on the basis Don't base yourself on your human sense. Don't base yourself on the mortal sense. Base yourself on the divine, on what you know about God, on the Word as the Word. And finally, that thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image of that which is in the water under the earth. This is the realm of the counterfeit, the so-called opposite, the so-called counterfeit. What a big point. Don't even try with your human mind to identify the counterfeit. And that's what we so often do. And we think it's Christian Science, that we identify the problem. We identify what we think the problem is. Often we take that statement, by reversal, error can serve as a waymark to truth. So we say, oh, okay, so I'll take the error and I'll reverse it. I will reverse it. I say, I see what the error is, and then I identify that error, and then I reverse it. But that isn't the Christ. We don't let the Christ must reverse it. By reversal. And if you look at everything, if you investigate everything in the textbook about reversing, exchanging, translating, retranslating, this is all the office of the Christ. It isn't the human office at all. The human mind can't do that. Only the mind of Christ can do it. Then it can serve as a waymark to truth. So that's a big point of the Christ, not to try to identify what is error, but to allow the divine nature to do it. It's there in the divine nature because the I am is automatically also the I am not. Now, what do we mean by that? The I am, let's just say it this way. Being says, I am what I am, and I am what I am not. I am the divine mind, and I am not mortal mind. And in the I amness is the identification of what I am not. So mind identifies what is not mind. Spirit identifies what is not spirit. Mrs. Eddy calls this the equipolence of God. I dare to bring in another new term, or maybe you know it already, maybe you've heard it already, the equipolence of God. She speaks about the equipolence of God in the 6th chapter when she's explaining pretty much at the beginning of that chapter, her own experience of how her discovery, what her discovery was and the steps that she went through and how it gradually dawned on her, the allness of mind, the 3 great verities of spirit, omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent spirit. And she defines what that is and says that the glorious, the glorious reality of creation was revealed to her. And this experience of the equipolence of God at the same time, after speaking about the glorious fact of creation, to the first record of creation. She says that at the same time, this revealed to her the equipolence of God, and she saw the awful unreality of evil. Now we read that statement and we say, how terrible. She saw the awfulness of evil. But it doesn't say that. She saw the awe-filling nothingness of evil. The fact, let's have the text. It's going right through from page 1, opening of that chapter, 107, 108, 109, and 10. My discovery, after describing her being in the confines, she says, my discovery that erring, mortal, misnamed body set my thoughts to work in new channels and led up to my demonstration of the not as the leading factor in mind science. Great verities of spirit, omnipotence, omnipresence, space, constituting all science, contradict forever eternal verities, reveal primeval creation, in which all that he has made, pronounced by his wisdom good. You hear how she goes back to the true record of creation, the eternal verities of spirit, radiant reality of God's creation. That's the radiant reality of our. Thus it was. Okay, thus it was, after seeing that all is mine, reality of existence is, she says, thus it was before the awful unreality called evil. What is she really saying she beheld? That she was filled with awe before the... In which way? How? By seeing the allness of that mind which is spirit. This at the same time, and this is the exact relationship that the two records have with each other. Statements which are equipolent. They say she saw the allness of God is the same thing to say of God good. You at the same time see the unreality of evil. They're the same thing. That's the equipolence. She said the brought to light another glorious proposition, and the establishment of the kingdom of heaven on earth. In other words, that there is a way of perfection. Can become that which we are. In the days of creation, how we become what we are. How to become identity which we are. Notes, and you put a little note there. I don't understand a word of this. You put down, and it doesn't matter, because now the seed has been planted, and once it's planted, it will appear everywhere. And now when something comes up and I talk to you, this is an instance of equipolence. Can you hear it? Do you remember these experience was? That you cannot see the allness, the complete and total nothingness of that which is not God. And that's what the two records show. We were looking at that question of identifying the counterfeit. Let the nature above, that divine standpoint within us, that absolute standpoint within, identify every further level, whether that level is then even at the point of the counterfeit. That was their concept of the world. That was an old, and the earth beneath and the waters under the heaven. Remember that term, Sheol, or the underworld. agrees, and we see that the demands of the Christ translation on page 115 and 116 of the textbook, that in the Christ is always saying, don't make any wrong concept or about earth, about the second degree, or even about what has been gravity is. This is defined from above, from the divine. Of God's nature is the only definer. Thou shalt not bow down. The moment we have a false identity, we tend to serve that identity. It's another form of bondage. It's not the freedom of soul, that frees us from a false identity. For I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God. So we have to be sure that we don't our spiritual sense with a divine sense. Fourth generation of them that hate me. Then kind of what can be called a 3.5 here. It's a between soul and principle. Between of the commandments comes in this bridge, 3.5. The 3.5 are where it is mentioned many, many times. Consequently, there is some reference to it in the 16th chapter of the Apocalypse. If we go back to the days of creation, and we think about that third day, and we said that that was like a break, that there was a break coming in within the breaks that were indicating the calculus. And so at the point of to the seed within itself, the break came. Now we have that break coming in again. And that break is any tape recordings of Max Kepler's, and he mentions the bridge from soul to principle. We have to stop.